to be following up on some of those things that were raised in the first panel about the woman from Malawi who said, but what about my farm? And how does this look from the field level? I'll be presenting some results from work we've been doing in Western Kenya, but using them as an illustration of some broader issues here. And if I can get this to work. So we're looking at a range of what are called climate smart practices here. The Nyando area in Kenya has primarily maize, sorghum, sugarcane, and livestock. It's mostly subsistence farming. There are some fairly steep slopes, a lot of soil erosion, flooding, drought, high poverty rates, and malnutrition, the kind of classic problems you find in many of these cases. But it's also been an area where there has been a lot of agricultural research and extension for quite some time. Despite years of promotion, though, the graph shows that the adoption of technologies is still quite low. And here we are talking about water harvesting, irrigation, agroforestry, no-till. The higher adoption rate is high-yielding varieties. Then the next one after that is stress-tolerant varieties, which is still quite low. Well, if we want to look at why is that adoption quite low, the first thing is people cannot adopt technologies that they don't know about. And so this graph shows the awareness broken out by gender. So the blue lines show that, with the exception of high-yielding varieties, men are much more likely to know about the technologies. We've looked into some of the reasons for this. What are factors affecting this? Education, certainly. Women have less education. We look at sources of information. It turns out that agricultural extension agents are mostly talking to the men because they are the ones who are acknowledged as the farmers, even though in Western Kenya, women are planting and managing crops on their own, and they need that information. You can't assume that it will be transmitted from the spouse. The other thing is that, with all due respect, the farmers' producer associations are male-dominated, and that is not where women are getting their information. Women are getting their information from church groups. So we need to look at what are the barriers to participation going on. Now, if they know about it, do women adopt less frequently than men? Actually, gender is not a systematic constraint across the board on these technologies. We do find, in fact, that when women, of the people who know, for many of these technologies, women are more likely to be adopting, especially when you control for some of the other factors that affect adoption. But it's also not one clear story. So I want to go into a little bit of what are the complexities involved. If they know about these things and they're wonderful, why aren't they adopting? Here, this is a graph we've used to tell the story. Adoption is not just an individual decision. So if you think about the time scale on the horizontal axis and the spatial scale of something on the vertical axis, new seed varieties are in that bottom corner. You get the returns within a season, and you can do them on just one farm by yourself. So it's not a problem. The minute you start talking about planting trees, though, or dealing with soil carbon, we heard something earlier about these no-till, for example, takes longer for that to start showing returns. Well, if you don't have secure tenure, then you don't have the incentive, and you may not even have the authority to plant trees, for example. Then, if you move up the spatial scale, Integrated pest management, you get the returns in a season, but if you're a smallholder, you can't do it by yourself, because if I release beneficial insects and my neighbor sprays heavily, then we've got a problem. So therefore, you need coordination. Now, most of the natural resource management practices involve both large spatial scale and longer time horizons. So you need to worry about both the property rights and the coordination. Where's that coordination going to come from? At higher levels, the state, the government, certainly plays a role, and Guillaume had was laying out some of this. But at lower levels, the government does not have the capacity to do it. It requires collective action among the farmers. Some places that collective action works well. Other places, it's a problem. Johannes mentioned water user associations, for example. Sometimes they work well, sometimes they don't. So we have to be looking at where is this coordination going to come from for many of these technologies, especially water harvesting, watershed management, irrigation, some of these other technologies that were mentioned in the report. So if we look at this, I mean, the bottom line, I don't have a neat bottom line saying it's complicated. It depends on the technologies. Credit, information services, land tenure, and collective action are all important things to consider if you want to get scaling up and expansion of this. We also find that these institutional issues are very important. So the technology adoption needs to consider the biophysical context, but also the institutional context. Now, we haven't gone as far in mapping that institutional context as we have on the biophysical, so you won't find it on the computer screens out there. But it's something you have to pay attention to if you want this to expand. The other is that we need to look at effective ways of reaching farmers, both women and men. And the starting point on that may be recognizing in many cases that women are farmers, either independently or in conjunction. And to get the information out, then look at what are the constraints they are facing and how do we overcome that. So I think there's really great potential, and one of the important things out of the book and this new study is that these new seed varieties have such potential. And those, if you remember, were in the bottom corner. So those are relatively easy to get out as long as we pay attention to that whole institutional context. And how do we get the seed systems? How do we make women and men aware of the potential? And then how do we look at the other kinds of things that they are going to need to adopt along with the seeds to get those additive and multiplier benefits? So thank you for the opportunity to discuss this and the rich discussion that we're having here. Thanks.